Hi everyone, welcome to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. It's me, Brian Francis, the ever-persistent and always invisible voice inside your head. I am here today, on this auspicious Friday, playing a game called Horizon Zero Dawn. This game came out last year, but we are playing the Frozen Wild, which came out last fall? I think I got that right. And I'm joined today in the lower left-hand corner by two special faces. Alyssa, first of the faces, would you please introduce yourself? It's been a while since we had you on.
Yeah. I'm Alyssa McAloon. I'm contributing editor and I do news at Gamasutra.
And other special guest, would you please introduce yourself and why you have a particular interest in Horizon Zero Dawn?
Hi everyone, I'm Eric. Why I have an interest in Horizon Zero Dawn is because I was part of the development team. I was lead core designer and part of the design team, basically designing both the Frozen Wilds and Horizon Zero Dawn.
Awesome. We are here today because, in particular, you are giving a post-mortem on the design of Horizon Zero Dawn at GDC this year, right?
That's correct. Yeah, my first time presenting at GDC, so I'm very excited.
Nice. Are you ready for San Francisco and our weird weather that is up there? I'm not actually
I've been to San Francisco a bunch of times. It's a beautiful city. I haven't checked the weather. Is it bad or is it good at this point?
It's raining right now, which is odd.
Oh, well, it was -8 here, Celsius, and the temperature felt like -15, which is extremely cold. So I'm ready to go to San Francisco, I think.
I think that sounds normal. I don't know what you're talking about. That sounds like a lovely weather. Oh dear. We got some angry machines up here. Real quick in the chat, I'm going to give a shout out to Mick Wizardry and Roman Lux, who are joining us today. I'm going to try and take a look at this machine, figure out any weaknesses. In the meantime, I think my first question for you today is, actually before I ask that question, I will give a reminder to the chat. If you have questions about Horizon Zero Dawn, any particular things you encountered, anything you want to know about the game's design, feel free to ask them and we will throw them out to Eric. My first question for today, though, is could you pitch us your talk, and if for game designers heading to GDC or anyone else in games, why they should come to your talk and what will be of interest to it?
Right, sure, yeah. So I'm going to be doing a talk, well, it's what's called a game design post-mortem. So what I'm going to be doing is I want to take the audience like on a journey from basically the start, when we started designing Horizon, all the way up till ship. And basically it's a very honest talk about all the different problems we faced.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did once we faced them, and how we got there as well. So it's kind of it's the entire journey of the very early beginnings all the way until to what you're playing now, essentially.
Nice. I guess could you also I guess it would be a good time to ask what's your background as a game designer? How long have you been at Guerrilla Games, and what got you interested in the art of game design?
I've been at Guerrilla Games with a short break, almost 15 years. Time flies.
Mm-hmm.
I started when I was just 19 and joined Guerrilla Games as a level designer. As you may or may not know, Guerrilla Games before Horizon, they made games called Killzone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that. Essentially first-person shooters. And I started as a level designer on that, on Killzone 1. And then we designed Killzone 2. I moved on to multiplayer back then. I was one of the senior game designers for the multiplayer and online components. We did Killzone 3. Killzone Shadowfall, I was lead designer on. And in between, I had a short stint at Ubisoft where I worked on Watch Dogs. But that's different. That's 7 years ago already. But I came back to Guerrilla and then worked on Horizon. I got into game design quite at an early age, actually. I was 12 when I first started making levels, environments essentially for games like Unreal Tournament and Duke Nukem 3D and Quake and all those old classics. And that's how I kind of met a lot of people online who also made levels. And one of them actually started the first version of Guerrilla Games, and that's how I got into contact with people here.
Nice.
Wow.
That's really cool. I guess my first question then, based on my experience with Horizon Zero Dawn, could you talk about the first time at Guerrilla Games that you realized instead of making another shooter like what the Killzone series was, you all will be making this sort of broader open world combat that involves about fighting monsters more often than fighting people, robotic monsters in this case, but like non-human entities. Could you talk about what like that first conversation was like about that, and what your first thoughts were about having to design a game with those parameters?
Well, it's actually I think while we were making Killzone Shadowfall, there was a large feeling within the company in general that we had done multiple Killzones, all the similar type of games, although on different platforms. There was always a feeling like, hey, can we do something else? And the thing that came up the most in conversation was like, well, what if we do something that's almost like a complete 180, like the total contrast of what we can do, right? So Killzone is very dark. It's a world where you don't really want to be. It's dystopian kind of futuristic kind of sci-fi world. And we said, well, let's make a world where you're actually where you want to stay, which is a beautiful nature and natural kind of world. But at the same time, how is that a Guerrilla Games game? So, the idea of gigantic robot dinosaurs came up, and we all felt, that could work. That sounds really cool. But we also knew, we knew from the start that it was going to be, especially like early on the talks, that we really did realize that going from linear first-person shooters to an open-world third-person type of game was going to be a gigantic challenge, right? And it was. It took us quite a while to make this game and to figure out what it really was. But yeah, it was a beautiful journey, and I'm glad we made that decision back then.
Nice. We don't want to spoil your whole talk because obviously you're going to be giving it a GDC, and if people want more details about that talk, you can see it below. My next question, though, has to specifically do with paper prototyping. A lot of times when designers are giving advice to other designers, it's, we started with paper prototyping and then we moved on from here. I'm curious, how do you paper prototype an encounter in a game like Horizon Zero Dawn? Because unless you have toy dinosaurs there on the table, which I hope you did, I'm sort of having to rely on my imagination to see what that looks like.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to do that. I think, and this is actually part of what I'm going to be talking about at GDC as well. So the mission that the original concepting team started out with was actually not like designing out stuff on paper. It was actually building it in game. Mm-hmm. But in that lies a gigantic challenge, right? So if you have a small concepting team and pretty much only Killzone technology and Killzone assets, like where do you start? So that was a complex process. But having said that, I think a lot of the experience that we had back then on Killzone was already with some more complex enemy types. Some of the levels or enemies in, for example, Killzone 3, they were very complex set pieces that we used with similar types of complexity as the robots. And so trying to transplant that onto a paper design and then early on into prototypes, so that was kind of the key. But yeah, it's you have to play this kind of stuff in order to know how it's going to work, right? Mm-hmm. You can spend, I think, years on paper trying to figure out, like, that might be fun, but until you have the controller in your hand and you're actually playtesting it, that's worth nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Alyssa, based on your time with the game, do you have any questions based on what you've seen?
Well, I was going to ask, you have a lot of experience with Killzone, and you said that this is kind of like the contrast to, it's the opposite of kind of what you see on paper for Killzone. But was there any specific, like, design that you did with the Killzone series that kind of was translated into this game in maybe a subtle way?
Well, I don't think anything directly got translated into Horizon, but you maybe, I don't know if you've played Killzone Shadowfall, but there were already some concepts there that we wanted to, instead of being a very linear experience, have more choices and more options for the player, and kind of it was going towards that feeling that we, like in Horizon, you don't. There's not a one solution that is the key solution, the main solution. There's lots of options, and depending on what kind of player you are, you can tackle these options in different ways. And I think we started experimenting that with the last Killzone, but we really went all in with Horizon in the end.
Yeah.
Cool. Just a reminder for chat, feel free to throw out any questions if you have them. My next question then is going to be, what is your experience been designing encounters in Horizon that are more open? Like a player in theory, if say an encounter is like a circle in the map, and a player can literally discover the encounter from any direction. What's the difference between that and designing the encounters of Killzone, which obviously when the player's in a first-person perspective and on these more linear maps, they sort of can like see, like they sort of get one fixed approach moving into an encounter versus this, which is more open.
Totally, yeah. It's a very different approach, and I think it starts with two things. I think one thing is understanding how the robot works and how it will react. Because in Horizon, all the robots have different functions, right? Some of the robots are what we call like type of transport robots, so they transport resources throughout the world, etc. And they behave differently depending on what the player does. So they try to run away, for example. So depending on the type of robot that you have in an encounter, the encounter space needs to be set up differently. So, for example, the tramplers, for example, they needed open spaces and getaway areas. Whereas if you fight something like a Thunderjaw, it's slightly set up differently because that thing isn't going to run away. That thing is just going to try and kill you. And also the size of the robot determines the kind of encounter space that you have to design. But I think the second part that's really important is that we have to look at all the options that the player has depending on which phase of the game they're in. So early on, there are some tactical options, but not all yet. In the middle of the game, you have more, and at the end of the game, you have all of them. So the encounter spaces, you can probably tell if you play the game, the encounter spaces develop over time as well alongside the player. You'll notice, for example, that if the ropecaster as a weapon, for example, you can experiment with that early on in the game, but later in the game, there's much more space for you to tie down the robots and then actually have an effect on it. Another example would be having more height variance. So in the beginning, the encounters are much more flat than they are later on in the game. And height variance it takes more skill for you to use. So designing the encounters, you have to take in a lot of different aspects for it to work well. And in the end, if you look at players playing through them, they still surprise us sometimes with, oh wait, well that's a solution, and that was the goal of it, right? To give the player the power to choose for themselves which solution they like the best.
One specific thing I noticed when I was playing was their hunting lodges, right? Placed throughout where there's like different challenges there. Using that as like a very unique way to kind of like teach you different ways to use these equipment you're unlocking and to try new strategies with the machines and teaching you about the different behaviors they have. Can you talk a little bit about those as like a tutorial?
Sure, yeah. So early on we were trying to figure out like, okay, so we have all these tactical choices that the player can do. How in a fun way can we expose them to it? And we felt that we looked at the lore together with the narrative writing team. Like, what can we do? And they wrote in the whole area of the whole idea of so some hunters need to show their skill and prove their worth and all that. And especially with a character like Aloy, that felt really relevant because she's an outcast. She wants to prove herself. And at the same time, that kind of character progression, that kind of narrative progression really goes in line with the player as well. Because as you unlock new hunting grounds, we felt it was a great platform to then showcase some of these deeper tactics. Wasn't always as easy though, because some of the challenges we put in there are difficult on purpose. But what we ran into early on was that some of the challenges could also easily be what we call cheesed. So people would interact with them in ways that we weren't really expecting and just cheat through them almost. And that helped with finding more bugs, etc. But it also made it difficult to make those hunting grounds really bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
Right on. In chat, there's a question. McWizardry would like to know, how difficult was it to tweak the AI interactions to achieve the gameplay experience you wanted and not confuse or inconvenience players?
Well, if it's specifically about the robots,
I think by AI they mean I guess they would mean like attack patterns and behaviors for each individual creature, but I guess like also the AI would apply to the human enemies you fight as well. So it's a broad question. Feel free to.
Right. Yeah. So was it difficult to how difficult was it to tweak the AI?
Yeah.
Well, I think we looked at it at first from a robot to robot or machine to machine basis, right? So I think we quite early on had a good idea about what each robot should do and shouldn't. Then we put that to the test against a player or multiple in playtests, etc. And it was more of a balancing thing than trying to figure out if the AI was good enough. But the problem started arising when we put multiple robots together, for example, like herd behavior or trying to make more complex encounters. Then the AI needed to work together, and then we would get sometimes results that we didn't necessarily expect or even wanted. So I think group behavior is a very difficult thing to do. Again, there's a fine line between wanting the robots to look smart, right? Mm-hmm. There's like sci-fi super beings almost, and versus creating an interesting challenge. So there are some elements where if you figure them out, the machines can actually look stupid, but we kind of had to do that on purpose. That's not AI's fault or anything like that. That's kind of designed in to make sure that the machines aren't too powerful.
Stepping away from combat for a moment, the Oog Tree has jumped in to comment that they love the lore of the old ones from the data points around the game, and they could get a feel for what the world was like before the Pharaoh Plague. They're asking how is it like to come up with a new technology and slang and culture and make it sound natural and realistic. I guess that's a question for the narrative team. So what I'm going to do is springboard the Oog Tree's question into one about how did you try and layer what the narrative team was working on with your own work? Like, what was the process between your two departments of trying to make sure that you were working in sync to let all this new otherworldly stuff make for relatable encounters?
Sure. Yeah, I first have to give a little bit of credit though, because our design teams are split up into three different main categories. I'm the core design team. I lead that, which is all the player systems and all the features like climbing, the traversal, and the combat, etc.
Yeah.
But we also have the world and the quest teams who focus mostly on narrative and putting the story and the lore into the game. But having said that, I think a game like Horizon is what it is because of the working together of the narrative team and the design teams. Mm-hmm. Because if you take out if you take out the world, then Horizon obviously isn't nowhere near the same game. But that balancing act on its own is quite tricky because if you want to tell a compelling story, sometimes gameplay has to take the back seat, and vice versa. So how did we do that? Well, I think lots of meetings, lots and lots of talking, lots of passionate and heated debate whether or not we should go left or right or up and down. But I think ultimately it's just trying to match what the player wants to do with what Aloy would do, what the world would do. That's not like a tangle answer.
That is a cool answer. Alyssa, I'm gonna go work on climbing this tall neck because I know how this game works. I know that you need to climb things before you can even before you can even hope to get anything done. Do you have any follow-up questions
I
based on that?
do. I caught an interview a little bit ago, I think with a member of your narrative design area that one anecdote they brought up was with Aloy's focus. There was a bit of a debate, I guess, with where you should introduce that in the early story, where narrative wanted it later on and then design wanted it earlier in for like different, because it's a core feature in the game, obviously. Were there any other kind of like memorable conflicts that you guys resolved like that?
Oh, that's a good question. Um,
Or if you just want to talk about the focus for a bit too, because that's what I love that in the game. But
Well, the focus is interesting, right? Because I was just talking about like that tension between sometimes wanting to tell a story and obviously, well, and showing gameplay. And this is one. This is, I think, one where game design kind of won in the sense of like, hey, yeah, we need Aloy to have special powers in order to interact with the objects in the world. So this is, I think, something they introduced earlier because of that choice. I think. Well, one thing I can maybe talk about, which is interesting, right? So, the economy in Horizon. So the way it works, as you see it today, is that it's there's merchants everywhere, and you can you find resources, and you combine those resources at the merchant, and they craft items for you. That had many different iterations, and the reason for that is because early on there was a lot of talk about, how would these tribes live together? How would it work? And from a narrative perspective, it was really important that they didn't have any money. There wasn't the money didn't mean anything. It's trading. It's all about trading, sharing goods, and all that kind of stuff. And then the goods were the robot part. But from for an economy standpoint, it's quite difficult to create a readable economy without having some sort of currency.
yeah,
So,
having a crafting system and the economy, they have to be separate things. Well, so that overlap there.
Exactly. So, I mean, we ended up with having a type of currency which is called shards, but at the same time, it's not as big as, for example, gold is in other games. Like with just shards, you can't buy anything. It's kind of a middle ground between what game design wanted and what narrative wanted, and I wouldn't say we nailed that in any way, shape, or form, because I do think there's some issues with the economy, like the readability of it and the complexity of it. But at the same time, the reason why it's such a complex thing is because, again, it's a tension field between the world of Horizon and us creating a readable player.
Right on. As I now re-enter combat and readapt to mechanics that I had thought I knew really well, but I'm trying to get my. Oh boy, this is gonna be fun.
You're not doing too bad, I think.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Just need my good old fire arrows. I need to aim. I need to deal with the fact that we're streaming this. Yeah, there we go. Gotcha, big boy. So my next, something that Chris Graft, who's our editor-in-chief over at Gamasutra, was something we talked about when we were playing this game, because we were playing it roughly around the same time, was the fact that so many of the machine fights are kind of about these even these small ones like these birds, wind up being these multi-stage things where you are trying to knock off pieces.
Right.
Can you talk about what you think? I think you want to save some of that for the obvious Post-Mortem itself, but what do you think is valuable about encounters that making every encounter have this kind of multi-layered nature, as opposed to just games where you just sort of knock health bars down, in a lot of other open world games?
Well, in an open world, what you want to do is you want to create systemic gameplay. So essentially, what we mean by that is creating gameplay that with the same ingredients, if you play it 10 times, the outcome is different every time, right? So you've got ingredients like the AI, but also ingredients like your choice yourself, but also the behavior, and all of that is built into that on purpose, and it is something that we really tested thoroughly, in the in the working versions of the game. We had something called robot test grounds, which is an offshoot of the actual map that you play today. but it had like all kinds of debug triggers where we could spawn robots in different forms or in different combinations, and we had all the weapons there and all the different options that the player had. And it's like you have to imagine this as almost like a barren wasteland, right? So the encounter space wasn't there yet. It was basically a flat ground.
Yeah.
And then we tested the robots in those grounds. Now, again, two purposes. One is just debugging, like seeing if everything works, because if you have too many variables, it's very difficult to see if it's a bug or whether it's actually per design. But yeah, having the encounter space not there, you have to rely on just the design for the robot. So by itself, it has to be fun. And I think this kind of testing, alongside a lot of play testing we did actually in game, makes it so that the robots, they're different every time you fight them, and the layeredness of each individual robots is obviously also part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Moving on after the robots, something interesting about this game is that it came out right before I feel like other open world games got really interested in climbing. In this game, climbing is mostly moving along sort of these preset areas that are in the level. Sorry, dealing with a little bit of lag on my home network here, but I'm curious if you... I'm actually going to work on this quest because I want this tall neck stuff. I'm curious how you all approached making the climbing system in Horizon, because you're dealing with this very mountainous environment, but it's not like you can climb anything. It's very specific and very there's a lot of open world on the ground, luckily, but it's not like other games that have come out where you can climb up anything you want.
Right. Yeah. It's quite a specific system in that sense, right? It's the thing is, I think what we try to shine through with every feature, including the things like the climbing, is that Aloy is she's awesome, but she's also a human being, right? Mm-hmm. So I think especially in terms of climbing, she looks it looks impressive when she does it, and it's kind of almost superhuman like, but it's also very grounded. It's also very real in that sense. And I think that was the core thing. Like, it feels weighty, it feels dangerous to do it. But at the same time, Horizon from the get-go was set out to be as accessible as possible. Right? We want players of all levels of skill, all types of players to be able to play Horizon. So we also didn't want the climbing system that was incredibly punishing or incredibly difficult or anything like that. So it's a combination of the two. It's like we want to make Aloy look like an impressive human, not a superhero. And at the same time, we don't want to create a difficult system that the players struggle with. So it's make sure it look cool and it's relatively simple to use at the same time.
I am in trouble. So, Alyssa, take it over.
I'll take a question from chat. Grendel wants to know if you can talk about some of the challenges related to kind of the stealth-based systems. So anything relating to enemy NPCs becoming aware of your character, or anything that you had to do tweaking to work with those hiding systems you have.
Sure. Yeah. The interesting thing is, so stealth games, right? So if you look at full stealth games, there's a lot of things in there to make it a full stealth game, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, for example, re-engaging with stealth. So let's say you're hiding, you get spotted. That's kind of a failure. But in a lot of pure stealth games, it's either relatively easy or very readable in order to get back to re-stealth, because mm-hmm. That's what the game wants you to do. They want you to kind of hide again and try again. Horizon is not a full stealth game, right? So we figured that part of hunting is being stealthed, but ultimately we wanted people to go into fighting the robots, right? So the difference I think there is that re-engaging with stealth is not as apparent, for example, as in other games. It's I wouldn't say more difficult, but it's also not. It's not the. It's almost like you're preparing for an encounter, and once you engage with it, we want you to kind of pull through or completely disengage from the encounter.
Yeah.
Or if you're like me, maybe die.
Or well, yeah, I wouldn't want you to die, Brian. That's not what we want.
It's work in progress.
But tweaking the values. Well, again, I think it goes back to like Horizon wanting to be accessible. So I think if you're in stealth and none of the encounters have kicked off yet, then we're quite lenient with you not being spotted, etc. I think if you edge it to the edge of the stealth areas, then you can see that it's quite forgiving. Aloy is half sticking out and they don't see you and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, once you are in combat, then we're a little bit less forgiving, and then re-engaging with stealth is trickier. Does that answer your question?
It was a question from chat. So
Grendel, you'll have to let us know. And then I know probably the different. I know I'm very bad at stealth sometimes. So when I would be hunting down some of the deer-like machines, and they'd spot me, they would run off, and that would kind of give me a chance to reevaluate my strategy and go back in. And that was feels like some of that forgiving element you were talking about there.
Right, exactly.
There's another question for chat that you probably won't be able to answer, but I'm going to spin it into something. They want to know about more DLC or Horizon Zero Dawn 2. I know you probably can't talk about anything like that, but can we talk about any core? I haven't played the DLC, but were there any big design differences between working on the DLC and working on the main game that you can talk about?
Totally, yeah, we can talk about that. So the DLC was actually a very interesting journey because. It's both content aimed at people who finish the game, as well as that it's content aimed at people halfway through the game. Or not even halfway through, almost a third into the game. Because technically you can go to the Frozen Wilds after Mother's Crown. It's kind of like 1/3 into the game. Okay. You could go there. You're going to have a really hard time, but you could go there. But that created a really big problem where we had to test the DLC with both players who were low level and high level and all kinds of, and it had to be fun for both. And that's actually a really tricky thing to do because the rest of Horizon is all balanced towards. We knew telemetry was telling us almost exactly where players would be in their progression in terms of level and abilities and weapons, etc. Almost. I mean, there's always outliers, but for the Frozen Wilds, that was actually really difficult. So we would have play sessions, and we would get feedback this is a nightmare. It's way too hard. And then the game director would come to me and say well, Eric, what have you done? It's and then the next day we would test it with a different group, and they would say, wow, this is actually relatively easy because again, there were people using different skill levels, different understandings of the games, etc. Yeah. So that was a difficult journey. Yeah, I think we ended a little bit on it's slightly more difficult side of the coin, but
more rewarding if you go in at that lower level, then, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that was totally my design intention.
Oh, good job. Yeah.
She bravely ran away. She bravely ran away. Running away. I need to actually. I kind of want to re-engage with what just happened. So I decided to work on this tall neck thing because I want to get all the scouting stuff, and I saw that there was something up the hill, and I'm like, oh, the objective's up there. I'll just go and snag it. And without even fully grasping it, I hadn't realized that those creatures were actually holding on to the objective item. And I had this kind of Indiana Jones moment of you round the corner and there's a bunch of bad guys standing right there, or Han Solo in kind of the first in the first Star Wars movie, running around the corner and there's a battalion of stormtroopers. What is it like? I don't know. It's this fun moment of surprise and oh crud for me. And how do you plan for that? How do you because for all someone else could have done is I don't know, they could have dropped in from orbit because they're doing some weird speedrunning gimmick to launch. Ah, no. Okay, I need to fight. Question stands.
Well, what we do try to do, we play test a lot, so we actually do see. We have hundreds of people going through the content. We kind of see all the different strategies that people generally try to do, and then we can do two things. Either we can react to that and say hey, everybody climbs up there at the specific comms you have. Let's put in a surprise and let's see if we can work with that. And sometimes it's also, it's lucky strikes. It's on paper thinking like, well, what would I do if I would get to this comms giraffe and I had to find the parts and I tried to climb up there? Hey, let's put up a surprise there and let's see if it works. So it kind of works both ways. Sometimes we plan it, and sometimes we're just really lucky. Maybe even most of the time.
Hang on, I just need to do some weaponry equipping here. Okay, what have I got? Tripcaster, that's what I want. It's my bum. Okay, cool. Right on.
These guys are tricky. We had so these are the Scorchers. We got a lot of feedback on these because especially they're very different robots from the Horizon before the DLC.
It's a big dog. It's shooting explosions.
Well, the biggest difference.
It got me. It's fine.
The biggest difference is, well, maybe that's obvious. You proved my point. They're very fast and they close in the distance, right? So. A lot of the robots in Horizon, they're more long range, so they create distance in order to strike at you. This one is almost completely the opposite, and just tries to get close to you constantly. And it was I can tell you, internally there was quite a lot of discussion of whether or not we should actually do that, because it to some, it almost felt like, we're going off script, right? Like we've taught all the Horizon players so many different tactics. Now we throw in a robot that all of them literally don't work on them anymore.
Mm.
And
as we just saw.
Like we just saw, yeah, it's a very different beast. Yeah, no pun intended. We decided to keep with it because, one of the goals for the DLC is also to not just, we didn't want to do more of the same. We wanted to spice things up and really throw in some different combat encounters.
How many? I guess my first question is, who on your team do you have to convince when someone walks up and says, "Hey, let's make an enemy that doesn't work, that is an outlier
breaks all the
in
rules,
player behavior"? Yeah.
Well, the ultimate end boss is our game director.
Yeah.
We have to convince him. But there's other stakeholders. There's the different gameplay leads. But I would say actually, we do ask broadly within the team. Like once a prototype or a version of something is in the game, we do try to get broad. Acceptance on the team, because I do feel like even everybody can have a very good opinion about, not just the game designers, they can have a very good opinion of whether or not it's something that's truly Horizon. Like in the early days when there was no Horizon, nobody knew what Horizon was. Mm-hmm. It's more easy it's easier to win discussions like that. It's like, well, of course we need to throw in gigantic T-Rexes. That is logical, right? We don't have anything to prove against that. But after we shipped Horizon, everybody knew what the DNA was, or at least had an interpretation of the DNA. So then it became more difficult to convince people that slightly going differently or trying something new, and that's both good and bad. But we do try to include a lot of different people within the company to make those decisions, and then sometimes we overrule people. But yeah, that's just the fact of it.
Right on. As I prepare to revisit this encounter that just took my life, I am going to quickly look at my notepad and find a question from there. Eric, I'm kind of curious. Let's go all the way back to when you started making those levels that got you noticed by Gorilla. What was your first, I guess, I think I kind of want to know what got you creatively interested in making the levels that got you started, and what you think what are you generally interested in when you're kind of working on something that's very personal and very your own at that point, before you've run it by anyone else. What's your design philosophy when you're working at that level?
That's an interesting question, because I do feel that both my interest in game development and also my passion in it has kind of changed over time, which I think is interesting. So when I started, I wanted to create things, right? So when I started like building a level, back then you could do everything by yourself. You could create the 3D geometry, you have to do the textures, you have to put in the lighting, you put in the enemies, you put in the scripting, everything. It was kind of like creating your own little mini game inside a game, and then you could ship that off and people could play it, and it would be yours, right? And I love that. I love the fact that I could make something from beginning to end that other people then enjoyed. Now, obviously, moving forward 20 odd years, back then games were still being made by about 20 or 30 people. You had a much bigger impact. Guerrilla Games actually, back in the day, started with like 20 people as well. But nowadays it's 300 people, right? Or minimum, if not bigger. And what I actually enjoy doing now is not only I do still like coming up with ideas, but I really enjoy having a creative team who then comes up with ideas and kind of helping all the different departments trying to find what it is that they're trying to build, if you know what I mean. Basically facilitate all the different parties to contribute and making sure that everybody gets heard and everybody gets their 2 cents in, and then ultimately as a group develop something that becomes something like Horizon. I actually, because sometimes people ask me like, so what's the one thing in Horizon that you designed? And it's literally there's nothing. I can't point out something and say like, well, that was my idea. But actually, there is one thing, but it's a small thing. So the icons having different colors when you pick up stuff on the robot loot. Yeah, that was totally me. And so
Nice.
those colors, they're existing colors, but I said like, hey, we need to put icons like that in this. Anyway, so. But that's the only thing, right? Other than that, it's all a group effort, and I really enjoy building that kind of stuff as a group.
Let's not talk about the fact that another machines just snuck up on me, ruined my entire trap, and started this encounter before I was ready.
You could just there's loads of story quests. You could just like follow the story if you.
Yeah.
You can walk away with your pride intact, is what he's saying.
I'm trying to get. Oh no, this is bad. Oh, this is bad. Oh,
The
this is
trap
bad.
you were setting up reminds me of when I was playing this. I went into a cauldron that I was like had no business being in because the boss in there was too difficult. So I spent like a good 15-20 minutes just crawling around the outside of it, setting up traps, and then leading him through that for the rest of it. Which is like, by the time I took him down, it was such a great feeling to be like, yes, it all paid off. But my adrenaline at that point was going real high. So I can feel you right now, bro.
Bravely ran away. Bravely ran away. Okay.
You can play yourself into a corner, no matter how accessible we try to make the game. It's like, I don't think there's any going around that.
What has surprised you as the game's been out in the wild? Like I think it's always interesting asking designers, you spend all this time in the game, you play test it, you think you see everything, and then you pop on a Twitch stream, stare at it for 5 minutes and just go, I have no memory of this place, as you watch someone try to do all this stuff that you thought was impossible.
Well, no, actually, the thing I enjoyed the most, especially when the game came out early, I watched a lot of Twitch streams of people playing and YouTube videos, and I was amazed at the combinations of tactics they used to take down robots, and some of them were kind of embarrassing. Maybe I shouldn't even say them, but there's ways to kill the Thunderjaw that really weren't designed in, and when we saw people using those tactics and being really proud about them, but we were like, whoa, that's really cool that you can do that. At the same time, I was like, oh, should we fix that in the patch? Because that's actually not the way you're supposed to do it. One example was one guy, one player, they placed, I think, 15 or 18 tripwire, explosive tripwires. And then they would use, I think the lure call, to get the robot's attention. It would just literally walk over and just instantly die and blow up. And although that takes a lot of resources and a lot of effort and a lot of really well placed, figuring out where in the counter to do that, and the raptor with the Thunderjaw, the Thunderjaw would walk onto it. That was that wasn't intended. That wasn't the way it's supposed to go.
I'm really curious. Well, how did you? Well, I mean, not to challenge you on making your own game and knowing your own game, but did you never assume that someone might just try and 15 raw damage like traps on because the blast trap is effectively just damage and a little bit of concussive force. Like, was that never tested against the Thunderjaws?
Well, I think it was, but in terms of economy, we tried to make that difficult to do.
Right,
and
just
then
really expensive to assemble those traps.
Yeah, it's quite a lot of effort, right? So we're always amazed to see at what kind of lengths people would go to kind of just say, yeah, that's cool, I did that. Right? That's always a surprise. Like in a normal playthrough, I don't think that would happen. But yeah, if you look for it, you can do those kind of things, which is always a surprise.
That's kind of cool. I'm going to go back to hunting boars because I think it's much more my speed at this point. After that, I need to get my pride. I need to work my pride back up.
This might overlap with your GDC talk a little bit, so feel free to back off if you want to. But can you talk about maybe how the crafting system has evolved since like your early iterations versus now?
Well, let's see. So this does go a little bit into my GDC talk, but hey, sneak peek. The problem with the economy is that, well, again, it's one of those things you design out on paper. But until the entire game is there, it's really difficult to test. And then even when it's there, you need players to spend 30 hours to really test the limits of your economy, if you know what I mean. Like, it's easy to test like the first 10 hours of your game and see if your economy works, because everybody goes through that. You have loads of data, you can see what's right and wrong about it. But then if you stretch that to 50 to 100, that becomes really difficult. So the balancing of that, especially in the last year and a half, almost 2 years of the game, development of the game, that was the tricky bit. Because so imagine you're doing a playtest, and people are being told, like, okay, so you have 5 days, you're going to play 7 hours a day, and you need to complete the entire game. Because we want to see all the quest progression and all that kind of stuff, and see how they react to the story and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, you're trying to test an economy. So this is actually not relevant data, right? Because people are focusing on the story. They're not going in the open world as much as you would expect them to go. So you're getting data about your economy, but it's actually, is it correct? You don't know. So a lot of time was actually spent trying to analyze, were things too expensive? Were things too cheap? And you'd get different feedback almost every day. People complaining like, hey, this weapon, I can't afford it, I can never afford it. And then people saying, well, I got that after like 3 main quests. So what's the problem? So I think in terms of how it evolved, especially that end bit, that was the last 2 years, that was the balancing that was really tricky.
Right on. The Oogtree would only like to weigh in that they're one of the people who plays by stealth and sets up 15 blast wires. They say it's a valid strategy. I agree with that.
It totally is.
Yeah.
We just didn't see it coming to be that valid. Maybe that's what I'm saying. I don't know. But, it's cool to see people.
For what it's worth at my end, what are these? Things I can't buy. Is there anything useful in here? There are cool outfits in here. We are coming up on the last 10 minutes of our conversation, so if you have questions...
Oh, really? All right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, we've been... This has been great.
Flies.
We can always go forever, but I'm just going to open some loot boxes. They're not loot boxes. They are not the same as other loot boxes.
Boxes with loot within.
They are boxes with loot within. I'm going to open these really quick as I try to figure out what I'm doing with my life.
Ruby Roo in chat wants to know if there were any design choices you look back on and think, thank God we didn't keep that in the game. Now after release, yeah.
Wow. I've repressed all of that. All those choices are gone. Thank God we didn't keep that into the game. Well, I mean, I can tell you there were a lot of bugs. And sometimes they're really weird and funny. We keep track here. Like the designers would make videos of like really weird things that they see. And we always ask, the directors for the company, can we show some of that? No, we're not going to show broken. Okay, so we have our own personal collection of things that we're glad they're not in the game anymore. But unfortunately, we can't. Share
Legal
that.
would come after you for that one.
Yeah,
I can hear people in the room go, just suddenly their heads snapping up.
My community team here already is kind of going at me like, "What are you talking about? Don't say that kind of stuff." So I'm already going to. No, there's nothing there that I would. No, it was perfect from the
This
start.
game is perfect. What are you talking about? In the chat, McWizardry has an interesting question, which I'll expand on, but I'll also read it in full. Were there people in the design team that argued against the inclusion of human enemies? And I guess my build-up on that is, how, like, you're trying to, like, establish a morality and a an ethical compass for this character Aloy. Like, what was it like implementing actual people that you would kill?
I think. Well, we knew we were going to have to put some form of humanoid combat in there. We knew that from the start, right? But we were also really focused on the robot part, right? So I think, from a morality perspective, I think we really had to work to find out a space for the humans in that sense. So there's obviously the simple ones like the bandits, they're kind of like cannon fodder. But all the other ones, you go into territories like robots are easy to kill, but humanoids, that gets a little bit iffy, I guess. Was the morality, was that tricky? I think you'd have to ask the writing team. I think that'd be more of a question for them.
Gotcha.
Because as a game designer, I just want to kill. That's what I do. No, for us, it was a fun challenge to figure out how the different how the different mechanics will work for the humanoids versus the robots, because it's a very different way of having combat. But yeah, from the morality standpoint, that's a tricky question.
That I agree. I agree with your assessment. I will. Prof. Dr. Dunn. Prof. Dr. Dunn? Yeah, Prof. Dr. Dunn would like to know what kind of games do you like to play outside of Horizon?
Lots of different ones. We do get to play a lot of more action games, RPG games, and that's I think games like Assassin's Creed, and we look at all the other open world games, Far Cry. We look at Zelda and all the other games. But your question is, what games do I like to play? And the interesting bit, I had the same thing when we were making Killzone. It's like once you start, it starts with you love a type of game, right? And then you want to make one. So I loved first-person shooters. I really wanted to make them, and I did for 10 years. And I wouldn't call it fatigue, but after a while, you just right now I don't play shooters as much anymore. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you go so deep into what a shooter is that it loses some of its charm. Mm-hmm. So at home right now, I mean, for research purposes, we play everything. We play all the action RPGs and all the different games. But at home, I actually play way different games. I played Darkest Dungeon recently. It's a completely different game. Can I say this? I played Euro Truck Simulator. Have you guys played the game?
I know what it is, but I haven't.
Someone play it.
What do you like about that game? Sometimes the very slow vehicle simulator games. I confess they baffle me a little bit. What really hooks you in as a?
It was exactly that. I had a friend who played it, and I literally just didn't understand why he would play it. And then he challenged me. He said, "Well, just try it out," and I did, and it was actually pretty good. There's something very zen about it. There's something very you're just listening to the radio, trucking around, and there's no pressure, no nothing. But I'm really into strategy games as well. So Civilization, those kind of games. So I think the bottom line is it's very differently paced games. We make action games, and therefore I like to chill out at home and kind of play a different pace of game. I think that's it.
Got it. BrainCloud would like to know, did you hide anything in the game yourself, like scrawl "Eric was here" on a ruins wall?
No, I did not. Easter eggs, yeah, they're tricky to do because, well, literally at Sony you have to get legal sign off in order to do it, which takes out all the fun, right?
Yeah.
So I did that a lot in my early levels and in like when I didn't work at Gorilla. But yeah, we haven't really done that like personally in the last few games that we shipped.
Gotcha. And I guess kind of the speaking of the quest that we're actually in, because we're working on Waterlogged right now. McWizards really would like to know what were the design goals of this side quest, because it seems very unique and different from other parts of the game.
Wait, I have to be honest, I wasn't really following where you are in
We're working on the Waterlogged side quest, which is whoops, I have to replay this one, which is so far, it's involved looking up this dam that seems to have burst and sent water flying through the region.
Right. Well, so the cool thing about making DLC is that you kind of get to experiment with different types of quests that you maybe we wanted to do in the main game, but for some reason didn't make it in. So a lot of the quest design team, they save all the different quests that they didn't get in the first time and they want to get in there. And I think these type of quests they're different from the main flow because because we want to create a different experience. But also I think it's almost like we're experimenting, like to see kind of more what works, etc. If we have a little bit more wiggle room. So yeah, that's why you get these cool little gems.
Mm-hmm. Right on. As I immerse the audience in the wonders of text-based storytelling in this interactive game, yeah, we're kind of I hate to say this, Eric, but we're running out of time, and just off camera, they're starting to give me some looks if I don't start shutting things down. There's no one actually.
That's a shame.
I am referring to my cat, of course, because there is no one else off camera but me in my apartment. We would like to point out before we start wrapping things up that GDC and Gamasutra are sibling organizations under UBM. So when we talk about GDC talks like Eric's talk, which you can learn about if you scroll down and click see Eric's talk at GDC, when we're talking about that, we are talking about people we work with. So we just want to be clear about disclosures and all that business. On top of that, we would appreciate it if all of you here, fine folks, who are interested in more conversations with game designers were to click the follow button. If you do that, you'll get a notification when we go live with people like Eric to talk about their games. And we've got a couple more GDC... Yeah, Aloy, I know. My focus can help me. We've got a few more talks planned. Like, we're going to promote a few more talks before GDC starts. But then after that, we're just going to be... going throughout the year, following the games that are coming out, playing games that we're interested in, and talking to the people who work on them. Other than that, Eric, is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before you go?
Well, no, yeah, thanks for checking in and listening to me ramble on about the game we made, and yeah, I hope to see as many people at the GDC as possible. That sounds really like a lot of fun.
Nice. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and Alyssa. Thank you for subbing in today.
Yeah, glad to help out.
Special shout out to news writer Alyssa at Gamasutra, who was super awesome and helped me out today. With that, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.